All right, everyone, so it's time for an interesting video, something a little bit different, but I actually still have all of my old smartphones, so I figured I'd make a video basically showing you guys all of my smartphones that I've ever owned throughout my entire lifespan. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I'm going to actually go through and talk about each of these phones and why I really enjoyed them. And it's also a little bit interesting because I'm a little bit different when it comes to smartphones. I never stick with one manufacturer. With every single one of my phones, I've always jumped to a different manufacturer, and I actually enjoy doing that because I feel like I get a real different experience, a different upgrade. I don't really like using the same device over and over and over again. If I'm going to upgrade my phone, I want to go with someone else who's going to give me a completely different experience than what I had before. I actually enjoy learning and kind of figuring out what I can and can't do with these different phone manufacturers and sort of the different areas, I guess, that they target. I'm also a bit different because I actually don't care for flagship devices whatsoever. I never use my phones for gaming or anything like that, despite me being a huge gamer. I never play mobile games. It's just not an area of gaming that I really care for. It's just really not my thing. So most of the time when I'm using my phones, I'm just sitting there watching YouTube videos, maybe on Twitter, checking comments, doing the occasional web search here or there, or texting the occasional person here or there. I really am not on my phone all the time. And because of that, I don't need to spend basically thousands of dollars to get the very best of the very best. It would just be wasted. All that power would be wasted on me. So what I'm much more interested in is actually getting the more budget-friendly phones, or at least I guess the flagship killer type phones, which is what OnePlus used to brand their phones as. But the phones that cost around $500 US, they're around there, that pack a ton of features with a ton of great hardware and stuff like that, and just really kind of add a lot of value for what you're paying for, and phones that kind of differentiate between the norms. So what you're going to see through all these phones, by the way, is just completely different manufacturers for every device. I'm going to talk about why I really went with those phones, what I really enjoyed about them, what are some of the things I really didn't care for, why I upgraded to the phones that I did upgrade to, and I guess we'll talk about in the future what I'll be upgrading to next, or what I'm thinking about. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoy this video. For those of you who are kind of younger and never known anything besides the Samsung Galaxy series or the iPhone, I guess you might find some things in here that you may see as interesting, but other than that, yeah, let's get on with it. All right, so the first phone we're going to be taking a look at today is the HTC Droid Incredible. Man, I remember really wanting this phone back in the day, and I got this as a birthday gift back in 2010. So yeah, this is my very first smartphone I ever owned. So kind of going way back there, but this was actually a really big flagship at the time, and got a ton of great scores. It was exclusively through Verizon Wireless, which was the carrier here that I had in the US, or my parents had in the US. They got me this phone on their plan. So yeah, I mean, pretty much the specs at the time were pretty high end, for what you got here. And what I really liked about this phone was just the design. Like overall, this kind of really spoke to me. You'll notice on the back here, there's a ton of like red accents all across this black body. And I believe that what HTC was trying to go for, and I'm trying to remember way back, but I believe they were inspired by like sports car designs, and so they wanted something that was sort of going to give you that sort of, I guess, edgy type feel, that kind of sporty feel from that. So yeah, it's got a ton of these nice red accents along the camera, and of course the front speaker there. So pretty interesting. In fact, if you open this up, because this was the era where you could actually take cell phone batteries out, you can see the entire interior of the phone is laid out in red. So I just absolutely was a huge fan. Like as a teenager, this was just the coolest thing I saw. So yeah, pretty awesome. Now on the front here, spec-wise, what we have is a 3.7 inch OLED screen. Yes, it is still an OLED screen. If we remember back then that OLED screens were really dominant in smartphones, or becoming dominant in smartphones before they made their way to televisions like we have today. So what we have here is a 3.7 inch AMOLED display, and it has a resolution of 800 by 480. So it's not even HD resolution. But you have to keep in mind as well that this was before the era where, you know, YouTube and user-generated content was really the dominant entertaining, you know, viewing experience. A lot of people still had cable televisions that they are watching, and you know, would just spend most of their hours just watching stuff on TV. And you know, I was doing YouTube videos back then, so like to me, you know, most of my content and most of my consumption when it came to entertainment was from YouTube. And I think that everyone thought I was a bit weird at the time, but of course, you know, these days it's pretty much the most dominant way of watching content is via online streaming. So yeah, spec-wise, everything was pretty high-end for the time. So we have a Snapdragon S1 processor. It's a 1 gigahertz CPU. There's an Adreno 200 GPU there. I didn't really play. I mean, you guys, as I just explained earlier, I don't play a lot of, you know, games on my smartphone. So for me, it's like it didn't really matter. I think even back then, I can't really recall some games I played on this thing. In fact, trying to recall here. So one thing as well is that unfortunately, this phone's basically unusable at this point. This was before, you know, basically you could just use the phone as a Wi-Fi only device, or really Android gave you that option. So they want you to immediately go and activate your phone. Now, there's a way you can bypass that, and I was actually looking up prior to you know, this video, is if there's a way I can actually bypass the screen and get into like the main menu and stuff. But unfortunately, it requires like some downloading. You have to hack and change some, you know, values of certain things in the background here. And there's certain updates that, depending on how recently your phone was updated, I believe this is probably the latest update. I don't know. It's been like years since I've used this device. You know, I'm gonna have to go and download and basically hack my way in to get past the screen. So, you know, to be honest, I don't really have any use for this phone these days, so I'm not even going to go ahead and do that. But yeah, I mean, here's a look, I guess, briefly at the display. You know, it was really nice for the time, definitely. And I remember like texting, and you had apps, of course, and all that cool stuff. And you know, I would watch some videos here and there from YouTube and the web browser and whatnot. And this was perfectly serviceable at the time. Now on the back here, in terms of the camera, we have an 8 megapixel camera here, so very, very low. I'm trying to recall if I have some pictures. I think I have some pictures saved in my Google Photos library. In fact, I will show some pictures right now if that is the case, if I'm able to download some from my Google Photos, because I basically save all my photos in the cloud, and I've had since these smartphones that I've started, you know, using. So yeah, it's a pretty bare bones camera when it comes to that, but you know, at the time it was really, really good quality. Micro USB for charging. There's the charging port here on the side, and then of course you got your headphone jack on the top, because again, Bluetooth headphones weren't the, you know, dominant way that we listen to music. And let's see, on the back of the phone here, in terms of the battery, again, removable battery, which is really, really nice, you know. But this was a 1300 milliamp hour battery that basically got you around 5 hours of constant use. It wasn't really that great, but yeah, you know, the nice thing about these, of course, is that you could just buy additional batteries, and if your battery died, you could just, you know, pop the phone out, replace the battery, and then you got yourself a fully charged battery and stuff like that. So that was one thing that was nice about that. But overall, yeah, I mean, as my first smartphone, you'll notice here there's even buttons and touch sensors here on the top, because this was before Android had their navigation buttons on the actual screen. So you would have to use these basically touch-sensitive buttons, your home, menu, back, and search buttons. And if you long press those, you would get different commands. And of course, you have this weird kind of button/scroll wheel. This would actually be a sensor, and you can scroll down, you know, if you're on web pages and stuff like that, if you didn't want to, you know, use the touch screen. So you had some options there, but yeah, this was quite interesting at the time. And there's even some videos of mine where you might see this phone in the background. I think I had like a red case for this as well. So yeah, if you notice some of my older videos, if you hear me using a phone, it is this phone. And I think I've even showed this off in some videos, or it was in the background and stuff like that. I'll try to leave up some cards if that was the case. But yeah, this was a great phone at the time, and I really enjoyed this one. All right, our next phone here is going to be familiar to a lot of you guys who even have this same line of phone to this day. This is the Samsung Galaxy S3. And yeah, this is before Samsung really made a name for themselves. In fact, around this time, Samsung was really making a name for themselves in smartphones. And I remember the advertisements for this phone were just hilarious because they really like stuck the knife into Apple and like twisted it and stuff. And you know what's funny is that like Samsung still does that today. Like they'll make fun of Apple for doing something and then they end up doing the very same thing that they made fun of them for. So it's absolutely, you know, kind of frustrating. It's just funny to see in that regard that all these companies like, you know, they like to poke the hornet's nest, but then they actually follow each other because they see, oh, they didn't lose any money. We can actually get away with this. So anyway, this was a huge upgrade. This was a huge upgrade to my HTC, you know, Incredible at the time. Right off the bat, just the screen of this phone is like the size of the body of the HTC Droid Incredible. So it's a much larger phone, you know, and again, this is at the time where, again, streaming was becoming more dominant and stuff, so you could have things like a YouTube app and watch, you know, full HD video on this screen. It was just fantastic, and this was a really big upgrade for Android in particular. So what we have here is a 4.8-inch OLED display, excuse me, with a 1280 by 720 resolution. So we got 720p here, which is great because at the time you could watch HD videos on YouTube, and that was like the big thing. It's like, oh, you can do HD on the go for YouTube. So yeah, that's quite excellent. And because it's Samsung display, you know, you get this excellent screen here. This is before Samsung really tried to boost the colors. So what you got is a lot of balance with good saturation, but you know, it wasn't so far out of the bounds of accuracy and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, everything regarding the phone and stuff, I don't even think you can watch YouTube videos on it. Yeah, it tells you that. It wants you to install a new version. And if we try to go to the Google Play Store, I wonder if this is even going to work. I'd be shocked. This is the old Google Play Store, which is just interesting. I doubt you can even do anything on here anymore. So if we try to search here for YouTube, we got YouTube Music, YouTube Kids. Yeah, let me actually spell it right, see if it comes up. Yeah, I don't think we have much of anything. But I mean, hey, the fact that you can even browse the store is even surprising to me. But yeah, you know, this is a huge upgrade here. So I didn't mention this on the last portion here, but the HTC Droid Incredible had 8 gigabytes of memory. This had 16 gigabytes of memory with a gigabyte of RAM. And they had different multiple tiers. Of course, you could still upgrade it, you know, via the micro SD card slot. But you know, I was starting to buy music around this time as well, so I didn't have a lot of songs or anything really saved, and anything that's saved on my photos went directly into the cloud and stuff like that. You can't even access Google Photos anymore on this device. But yeah, everything was just massive in terms of the upgrade here. On the back here, you still have an 8 megapixel camera, but it has a wider aperture. It does 1080p video at 30 FPS, which is great. And then on the front here, you have, you know, your single 1.9 megapixel camera that does 720p video. So that was pretty awesome. You got Wi-Fi N support with this thing, so that was a big upgrade in terms of just the speed and reliability of the Wi-Fi itself. And of course, you still have a removable battery. In fact, let me try to find the seam here. You could still take off the back of this thing. There it is. So this was plastic, you know, just a flimsy piece there, but here's the battery itself. And it's a 2100 milliamp hour battery, so it's a bit of an upgrade compared to the Droid Incredible, and they have this in different colors as well. So I had the white version. I believe at the time they had a blue version as well, and then later on they sold different colors and different variants. But yeah, this was just fantastic. Unfortunately, I don't think I can pull up any videos or anything like that. But like I said, it was a big upgrade for Android. You can sort of see the telltale signs where Android was really maturing into the platform it is today. So, you know, having, you know, a lot of these things like the app drawer and stuff like that. Hold on, let me exit out of this. Here's your, you know, app list and stuff like that. So everything listed here. It's quite interesting. Oh my gosh, remember Google Plus? This was Google's attempt at taking over Facebook. I wonder, can you even like get on this thing? No. But it's kind of interesting to see when you turn these devices on, all the old stuff that's kind of been installed on these phones. But yeah, the screen was just the biggest thing for me, and being able to watch YouTube videos with a nice display in HD at the time was just fantastic. And I spent far too many hours watching, like Classic Game Room and Angry Joe and RMake21 and all these people on this type of phone. So yeah, that was just that was awesome, and what a time that was. But yeah, this is a big upgrade for me personally, and overall I really like this phone. I liked how Samsung really packed this thing full of features and all these big specs and stuff. And while I didn't have, I don't think the beautiful design of something like the iPhone, you can see it was kind of reminiscent of that. And you even have these touch capacitor buttons, excuse me. You have your menu button that pulls up this drawer here, and then your back button here, along with your home button. So that was all kind of added, but yeah, it was quite an awesome phone for the time. There we go. And yeah, I just had a ton of awesome specs. So I really like this one. But eventually I had to upgrade the Samsung Galaxy S3, and what I got next was actually a pretty noteworthy phone. This is the LG G3, not to be confused with LG's G Series OLED televisions, which go by the same moniker here. Before the G Series was used for OLED TVs, it was actually used for their phones, and LG produced phones for many years then. Unfortunately, they don't do any phones these days. They stopped manufacturing their line of phones, but they were really good phones back in the day. Now, the reason this was a pretty noteworthy device is this was the first ever phone to use a 1440p display. Yeah, 2560 by 1440. Let me see if I can turn on. Yep, there we go. 2560 by 1440, that is the resolution of this screen. It's 5.5 inches, and it is not an OLED panel, it is an IPS panel. So that was the one trade-off that you basically had to make, is you got this super high resolution screen, but it was done with an IPS panel instead of an OLED. And I remember at the time I was like, well, the high resolution going from 720p OLED to 1440p IPS, I mean, that's a worthy trade-off. You're getting like, what is it, 4 times an increase in pixels. So yeah, I think I'm gonna go ahead and do that. And one thing that is important to note here is that what LG actually did is, and you'll notice this when you're kind of using the phone, LG employed a sharpening filter over everything. So even the text, the icons and stuff, they got like this weird kind of, it's like a light sharpening filter. And it's interesting because you look at phones today that have even higher resolution, displays. And I think, not even some of them look as sharp as this. And I think it's because of the fact that that filter is on, and also the fact that the pixel density is so tight with this. I believe the pixel density is around 538 pixels per inch. So that is just absolutely crazy to see here. But yeah, I mean, this was a huge upgrade in terms of just the screen. It's running Android 4, which is a KitKat, and you could upgrade this to Android 6 down the line. And yeah, we had a Snapdragon 801 processor here, which was a quad-core 2.5 gigahertz. There was an Adreno 330 GPU. We had 16 gigabytes of onboard memory, which is the same that I had on my S3, but you had 2 gigabytes of RAM, so you had that extra gig to help give you the flexibility of basically multitasking and stuff like that. And yeah, this was just awesome to use. Watching YouTube videos on this, I remember at the time, was just like, oh, that's crazy. I think I even did an unboxing of this phone way back in the day. Let's see if we can pull up YouTube. I wonder if it's even gonna load. Switch to youtube.com. Yeah, so they disabled YouTube on this phone as well. But yeah, so one thing you'll notice is that LG employed their sort of material design over everything. So you'll notice that the apps look like kind of cutouts or like clip art and stuff like that. And that's done purposely because LG employed their sort of own UI touches on top of the Android here, the Android skin. And this thing supported some pretty advanced features at the time. So it supported AC Wi-Fi, dual band AC Wi-Fi, which was pretty crazy because back then a lot of people still had N routers, and AC wasn't becoming sort of dominant as it was until later. On the back here, you have a 13 megapixel camera here, and that does do 4K video, by the way, at 30 FPS. And then on the front here, we got a 2.1 megapixel camera that does 1080p video. So it's pretty interesting to think about But yeah, you know, all of the different little touches and stuff like that are just fantastic. I remember using this phone. It was like, I really liked the layout of this phone, like the way everything looked. And of course, you know, having that screen, even though you had that sharpening filter, watching videos, even lower resolution videos on this thing, that sharpening filter actually came into place, or came into play, excuse me, very well, especially with those lower resolution content, because it would just look that little bit sharper on a display like this. But yeah, it's quite interesting there. And this phone, you can still take the battery off. Try to get it off here. You can still take the battery out, and you got a 3000 milliamp hour battery, which is awesome. You have your micro SD card slot up there, and I believe in back of this as well, you can actually replace the SIM card too. And of course, you have your volume rocker here, your power button. So all that was sort of employed, and then your single mono speaker. So yeah, I mean, everything about this spec-wise was just really advanced for the time. Like I said, the very first phone ever to use a 1440p display. And even though it had that sharpening filter on there, you know, I think it looked really nice overall. I think even when you look at this today, it's like, wow, the sharpness from this display is pretty insane. It's just that you don't get the perfect OLED black levels, which just would have made this phone, I think, age a lot better, especially if they went with that route. But, you know, I don't know if LG was necessarily manufacturing. I mean, this was 2014 back when this came out, so I believe LG was just starting up their OLED line of televisions. I might be wrong there, but I think the first OLEDs came out in like 2015, 2016, if I'm not mistaken. So this is right around the time where they're really, you know, kind of coming out with those first. And yeah, I guess they decided not to do that with their flagship phone here. But this is a great phone, and I really enjoyed using it. But alas, it was time to upgrade yet again, and the phone I really wanted but wasn't available for Verizon was the Huawei Nexus 6P. All right, this was basically the Google Nexus 6P before Google started making the Pixel line and started manufacturing. I really don't even think they manufacture their own phones. I think they still employ a third party to manufacture the actual phones. But before the Pixel line, there was the Nexus line, and this is the Nexus 6P, which was the final, I believe, Nexus device before they actually came out with the Pixel lines the next year. So I really wanted this phone, but it was not available yet on Verizon, or I guess there's something going on where I think I wasn't eligible for an upgrade yet. I'm trying to recall. So what I basically did is I went on my own plan, and this is when I got off my parents' plan and went with someone else, and I was able to basically start getting these phones that I really wanted that were only available in global markets. But because Verizon is a CDMA network, you were limited to only having CDMA phones, or phones that supported that band type. So this is really awesome for me because I really wanted this phone, and yeah, I wasn't eligible for an upgrade yet, and I went ahead and got it and went on my own plan as a result of that. So yeah, this thing is pretty awesome. So right away we went from 1440p. We still kept that same resolution here, so that this is a 1440p display, but it's at 5.7 inches, and it is an OLED display. So one thing I really wanted as far as an upgrade from my LG G3, I was like, okay, well, I already have a 1440p display. I can't see myself wanting more pixels, but I definitely want more depth, more, you know, quality when it came to the actual image clarity. So going from the IPS display to a slightly bigger, you know, OLED panel here with the Nexus was perfect for me. And this thing launched with Android 6, but eventually you could upgrade it to Android 8. And then it had a 8-core processor and an Adreno 430 GPU there. So I believe it was a Snapdragon 810 processor, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, this was quite an excellent upgrade, and this phone really aged well because it's basically just stock Android, or what was stock Android at the time. So a lot of the stuff in this phone has really aged well. And you can see, you know, it's still technically speedy and stuff like that, but it's got this just clean interface to it. And this is a phone that I think a lot of people ended up using for you know, more than they probably ever anticipated. So yeah, we have 32 gigabytes of onboard storage with 3 gigabytes of RAM with this thing. On the back here, we got a 12.3 megapixel camera here, which does laser autofocus and all that cool stuff. It does 4K video, of course. And then on the front here, we have an 8 megapixel camera up there. So, and that supported basically all the advanced Wi-Fi features, so AC Wi-Fi at the time. And then we have to also recall that, yeah, this was pretty much the era where we started seeing a turn in design, and removable batteries, excuse me, were not becoming sort of commonplace anymore. So you cannot remove the battery with this thing, but it's basically got an internal 3400 milliamp hour battery here, which lasted a decent time for what it was. And yeah, I believe I had, so I unboxed this phone on the channel, I know that, but I think I had the silver version initially, and then something happened where my phone broke, or I needed to get a new one. I believe, I'm trying to recall, I think I might have dropped it, or something might have happened where it just completely, I just needed a new phone right away. I wasn't really impressed with a lot of the new offerings at the time, so I believe I just went and got a replacement, and this was the white version, which was actually the version I wanted initially. I really liked sort of the white on black contrast here. It just looked very clean for what it was. So yeah, you know, this phone was just really awesome, and I think of all the phones I used, one thing I really liked about this phone was just basically the simplicity of the way it was presented. You know, it was like stock Android and all that stuff, and it just had none of the bloat and stuff that I even, you know, was kind of used to on the other devices. And then watching videos on this display was just fantastic. I want to see if YouTube is even supported here. Yeah, so you can still watch YouTube on this thing as well, which is just great. I mean, if I want to pull up one of my videos here, let's see, if I pull up my 4K Blu-ray collection, yeah, take a look at that. Looks fantastic. You know, full 16:9 ratio, so everything just fit perfectly. You got these two kind of front facing speakers, excuse me, which provided stereo sound, which was really nice. And yeah, this is just awesome. So that's pretty cool. At least on this device, you can still use, you know, YouTube. Oh, and here we go, picture-in-picture and all that stuff. So most of the stuff here is still usable for what it is, and yeah, that's quite excellent. So anyway, I really enjoyed using this phone for what it was. I have not used any of the Pixel devices that Google has developed now. I think maybe perhaps down the road, you know, we'll see. I'm not a fan of their current designs and the way the Pixels kind of look. I much prefer kind of you know, more modern, more sleeker designs like this. I'm not a fan of like having all these different cameras all around the phone and all that stuff. Like, you know, I want sort of balance when it comes to my phone designs, or the designs that I really like. So anyway, yeah, this is pretty awesome, and this was a great phone to use at the time. But after a couple years of using the 6P, I started noticing some hang up and glitches with some apps, and it was time to upgrade yet again. And what I upgraded to was the Nokia 7 Plus. Now, this was a pretty noteworthy phone for me because this phone is not available to buy in the US. I actually had to get this imported, I believe, from India or one of the other markets there. And the reason it's not technically sold in the US is because it's really not supported in the US at all. So I got a global version here, and this phone technically will support the bands. You know, of course, I had to support the bands because I still have to make calls on this thing. But, you know, this phone is not technically sold in the States here, so I had to get it imported. And again, if you're familiar with how kind of phones work, as long as you have, basically, as long as you have supported network bands, you can use this phone, or you can use your phone on any sort of network that has support for those bands. So that was all that I basically needed, and thankfully I was able to get this imported in, and it worked fine for what it was. You know, I basically had no issues making calls and stuff like that. And yeah, I really like this phone. I really like what Nokia was going for. Now, Nokia has been, you know, no stranger to phones. Everything that they used to make was technically indestructible and could survive a nuclear fallout, but basically, and by the way, that's no exception with this phone. You'll notice on the side here that there's scuffs, and I never once had a case for this phone. I've actually dropped this phone on concrete, and this is basically all it's done to the phone here. I'll try to focus. This is basically all it's done, is it made these little scuffs and scratches, and this is the phone falling on like concrete, by the way. So this thing was literally, you know, practically indestructible itself. You got this aluminum band here, and I love the way that they kind of painted this bronze. It just looked really striking and very, very premium, and everything about this phone, design-wise and build-wise, was just made to last here. You know, with the moment you feel this thing, it's got a bit more weight to it than I think a lot of people would expect, but it just feels solid. Like everything about it just feels solid, and it's definitely worthy of the Nokia branding. Although technically this is an HMD Global phone, because they actually bought Nokia and started, making these new line of products for them. At least that was the case at the time. So anyway, what do we have here? We got an IPS display. Yes, I went from OLED back to IPS. And this time it was a 6-inch 2160 by 1080 display, which gave you a 18:9 aspect ratio. So it was a much taller, much more wider display. And I knew that going back to IPS, I was like, I wasn't really a big fan of it on my LG. I missed my black levels. But I have to say that based off of the reviews that I was watching, and I was kind of careful to kind of look into this, the black levels on this phone for an IPS display, I mean, sure, if you're watching this in the dark, you're going to notice that, hey, this isn't perfect black. But when you're just kind of using it day to day, the black levels for what they are just fantastic, to be honest. They're actually much better than I actually thought they would be. So that's quite excellent. Now, this thing launched with Android 8 and then was later upgradable to Android 10, and this was via the Android One program. So this was Google's program, I believe, at the time, where they would provide these basically stock Android updates to the select line of phones. And so you basically got perfect, basic Android, with a few different things on top of it that HMD and Nokia added just to give you some extra features and whatnot. But most of it was stock Android. Now we have a Snapdragon 660 processor, which was an 8-core processor, an Adreno 512 GPU. It had 64 gigabytes of memory, but 4 gigabytes of RAM at the time. And then on the back here, we have a Carl Zeiss optics lens, which was a pretty high end for the time. This was like the lens that Sony was using for a lot of their cameras and actual phones themselves. And this was a dual camera mode setup. So we have both a 12 megapixel and a 13 megapixel camera up there. And that does 4K 30 video. And then on the front here, we got, a 16 megapixel camera, which is located right up there. And that did 1080p 30, and that was also a Carl Zeiss lens as well. So they packed this thing basically with really nice features and really nice hardware. And this was a budget phone at the time, but it really didn't feel like that in a lot of ways. And that's what I really liked about this device here, is that like the build quality, the software, everything came together to give you this really premium feel. And again, you could like just drop this. You could drop this on concrete and the phone would be perfectly fine. Again, you're seeing some scuffs here, but it's like, this is like the worst of the damage. And again, you're dropping this on concrete and stuff. I'm very careful with my phones, but accidents happen. What can you say? But I mean, even after those accidents, it's like this thing is still in TikTok shape, and the screen isn't cracked or anything like that. It's just quite excellent. Now, again, no removable battery. They pretty much stopped doing that at this point, and what we got here is a 3800 milliamp hour battery, but you'll notice up top we have a headphone jack. Now, I was being very resistant at the time to getting Bluetooth headphones. I liked my wired headphones and earphones and stuff. I much preferred, not having to charge my earphones and whatnot. I also preferred the audio quality of the stuff that I was using. So having the headphone jack here was like a big selling point to me. And so this was quite excellent at the time, and I really enjoyed using this device. And even though it was a IPS display, I mean, watching videos on this was just great. If we I think we can still watch videos on this. So yeah, we could still watch videos on this. I mean, all this looks pretty good. So let's choose we choose a dark video here, like my reminiscing BioShock stuff. Here we go. I mean, you can tell right here, right? You can see the difference in the black levels there. But for an IPS display, I mean, that's not bad at all in terms of black levels. I mean, when you're just watching it here in the day, like, it's perfectly fine. And of course, you have no worries of burn-in or anything like that you would have on an OLED display. So yeah, for what it was, I actually really enjoyed this phone, and the screen was not as bad, or is not as big of a downgrade, I should say, even though I was getting a wider aspect ratio, which I very much preferred just for watching videos, as well as browsing the web and stuff like that. Having more screen real estate was really nice. But even though it was an IPS display going from an OLED, I thought that the overall image quality was still pretty good. And it was a very accurate display as well. So yeah, all that was fantastic. I really enjoyed using this device. Anyway, so this was the last phone I ended up using before I upgraded to my now current phone, and I guess I'll show you guys that right now. And the final phone we have here, the one I'm still using, is the OnePlus Nord, the original OnePlus Nord. I have to say, man, I've now been using this phone for 4 years, it'll be this year, and wow. I honestly, I'm starting to look at phones now, but even then, I'm not so compelled to upgrade. Everything about this phone has just been buttery smooth. It's just been fantastic, to be quite honest. And they've done a really good job in terms of optimizing the software on this phone. Now, I'm not getting Android updates anymore. It's way out supported, and I believe this thing is running Android 12. So, it's running old software, but OnePlus has really optimized the software here, and to be honest, this phone is just buttery smooth no matter what I'm doing, no matter what sort of apps I'm throwing at it or anything like that. It's just been perfectly fantastic. So what we have here is a 6.4 inch 2400 by 1080 display, which was a 20 by 9 aspect ratio, so almost ultra wide, but it was an AMOLED display, and this phone has a 90 hertz panel. So it was actually a big upgrade going from the Nokia 7 Plus and indeed the Nexus 6P. You got a much more wider body as well, but it was the 90 hertz, getting that extra, fluidity when it came to just the user interface and stuff like that. And this isn't one of those adaptive displays where it changes the 60 and goes up to 90 and then back and forth. This actually stays at 90 the entire time. And I think it's what also, helps add to this, just the smoothness of this device, because whatever you're doing with this phone, it's optimized well. Things just open perfectly, smooth, and there's just really no issues when it comes to me using this display. Now, spec-wise, what we have here is a Snapdragon 765, which is basically an octa-core processor, and then we have an Adreno 620 GPU. We have 128 gigabytes of storage with 8 gigabytes of RAM, so it has a massive RAM increase compared to the previous phones I was using. And again, I just think it adds to the longevity of this device. With having all that RAM, you could just constantly multitask, and I never have things closed in the background, to be honest. Things on this phone just stay open, and it's, no matter what I'm doing, it just stays perfectly smooth for what I needed to do. So that's fantastic. Now on the back here, we basically have a 3-camera setup. We have a 48 megapixel camera, an 8 megapixel camera, ultra wide lens, and then there's a macro camera with 2 megapixels with a wide aperture there. And that does 4K 30 video. And on the front here, we have a dual cam setup, which has a 32 megapixel and an 8 megapixel camera. And this still does 4K video here on the front. In fact, it'll do 4K 60 video here on the front, which is kind of interesting. So there is no 3.5 millimeter headphone jack. So that is the one thing I had to give up. Unfortunately, again, the phones around these times, really Sony was like the only ones that are still keeping their headphone jacks with their phones. But yeah, that was something I had to give up, and now I have a pair of like Anker earphones that I really very much enjoy. And then we have basically all the supported Wi-Fi features there. There's a 4100 milliamp hour battery, and to be honest, using this thing day to day, again, I'm not playing games on this thing. I'm just sort of, checking Twitter here and there, checking my YouTube comments, maybe browsing the web here or there, texting some people, very basic stuff. This thing lasts me throughout the entire day, and I still have like 30% left in terms of a charge. So it's just awesome. Now, this case that I have on it actually came with the phone itself. It's a bit suntanned, by today's standards. So if I try to take this off, you can kind of see, hold on. There we go. Yeah, so the whole phone came with this this carrying case, or this case for it, and I really like the color scheme of this phone. This just bright blue, I believe it's called blue marble, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. I think just the color scheme of the way this phone looks, it's just very clean. So yeah, everything about this phone I just really enjoy. I probably will be upgrading in the next year. We'll see what kind of happens there. I'm kind of keeping my eye on a couple of phones, but yeah, I've used this phone for so long just because this phone has been really hassle-free, and of all the phones I've used this phone the longest. And going on 4 years here, the fact that this phone was like $400 I paid at the time. It's very budget. It was very cheap. The fact that I paid that and I'm getting this much life out of it, and it's still buttery smooth, is just the telltale signs of a well optimized and well valued product. So I'm very happy with this phone. It does everything I basically need it to. Hassle-free. The camera quality is good on it. The screen is good on it, and everything about it I think is just fantastic. But yeah, I really enjoy using this thing, and it basically does everything I need it to. All right, guys, so there you have it. Those are all the phones, at least the smartphones, specifically the smartphones that I've owned across my entire life. Let me know if you guys owned any of those same devices. So yeah, as I said, currently right now I'm using the OnePlus Nord, which is going on 4 years as of this year that I'll be using it, and since I've made that unboxing and stuff on the channel. And as I said in my sort of review, everything about that phone, or this phone, has just really been super smooth, and it's been kind of hassle-free. There's only been a couple of things where I've noticed it's like, okay, yeah, I'm starting to notice a few bit of hiccups here or there. I might, may want to look at sort of an upgrade. I'm not really impressed with any of the other general designs here. Just to be sort of transparent, I'm looking at sort of the Nothing brand right now, and seeing what they're going to do with their Nothing Phone 3 series. I'm also looking at, manufacturers like Xiaomi and stuff like that, and seeing what they're going to do over there. So I'm kind of taking an eye around, and right now is a bit of an interesting time because typically new phones and the flagships and the other phones typically come out around the spring. So we're basically in the new territory for when new phones are going to be launching and getting revealed. So I don't know if I'll be upgrading this year. Probably next year at the very latest is when I'll be upgrading. And yeah, whenever I do, I'll be sure to do an unboxing for you guys and kind of share that experience as we go on from there. But yeah, I just thought this would be an interesting video. It's a little bit different compared to the other content that I usually put out. So I hope that you guys at least found this somewhat enjoyable if you did watch this. And I guess other than that, I will talk to you guys later. All right. Thank you very much, and hope you guys have a great day.